Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Game Core. I just got the AYANEO Pocket S2 in the mail. Let's do a quick impressions video. So my plan here is to take a look at the controls and ergonomics and a couple other things, maybe the screen and some lightweight performance, and then later, once I've had more time to test it, we will do a full review. This is a premium Android handheld. It has the Snapdragon G3 Gen 3 in it, which essentially is the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, but with some handheld optimizations. And this means that it will take me a little bit of time to do some really in-depth testing with this chipset to see exactly what kind of performance you can expect with it. And so that's why we're going to kind of break this up into two different videos where we'll talk about how the device feels and then how it performs. Now last year I reviewed its predecessor, the AYANEO Pocket S, and this is a pretty sleek and premium device, but it has some features and other things that I felt were not premium about it. And even though I've only had the AYANEO Pocket S2 for a couple days at this point, I can tell you that they have addressed almost every single issue I had with the original model. So grab your favorite snack and drink and let's talk about all the things they've improved with the new AYANEO Pocket S2. Okay, before we get started, this is a review unit sent over from AYANEO. They haven't been sending me stuff for a while. It's been about 7 months, but I don't know, they hit me up with an email, so here we are. Like with all my other videos, all opinions are my own. They're not going to see this ahead of time, and no money was exchanged in any way. Let's start by talking about specs. So this is running the Snapdragon G3 Gen 3. Like I mentioned, this is basically the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, but with some handheld optimizations. So in essence, this is the top-of-the-line handheld-focused chip that's available right now on ARM-based devices. Now there are a variety of different options with this device, and that will come into play when it comes to RAM as well as storage. You can find between 8 and 16 gigabytes of RAM, and the storage will be anywhere from 128 gigabytes up to 1 terabyte. And the components will change depending on the model that you get. For example, if you get the bare bones 128 gig storage model, it's going to come with UFS 3.1 storage as opposed to all the others, which will be 4.0. The display here is the same across the board. It's 6.3 inches with a 1440p resolution. It's a 16:9 aspect ratio and runs at 60 Hz. It is rare to find an Android-based handheld with a resolution higher than 1080p, but I kind of wish this was an OLED panel or at least 120 Hz. The battery size on this thing is also pretty massive, 8,000 milliamp hours for the regular model, and they also are offering a Pro model, which comes with a 10,000 milliamp hour battery. And I believe that is the largest battery size I've seen in an Android-based handheld like this. Now, depending on the size of the battery, it will affect the weight, so you're looking at somewhere between 428 grams and 440. Now, this chipset should support Wi-Fi 7, but if you look at the marketing materials, they just call it high-speed Wi-Fi, so I think it's Wi-Fi 7, but I'm not 100% sure. It also has Bluetooth 5.3 and thankfully a headphone jack, which is kind of rare with AYANEO devices. The handheld is running Android 14, and one other thing worth noting is that its USB-C port is USB 3.2 Gen 2, which is video out capable. Now, like with all other AYANEO devices, they're going to be selling it initially on Indiegogo, and this will usually run for about 2 months. We're about 10 days into it. After they're done with this pre-order campaign, they will then shift sales over to their website, and the prices will usually increase at that point. But until then, we are looking at early bird pricing. So the lowest spec model, which is 128 gigs of storage and 8 gigs of RAM, it's coming out to $440, and it only comes in the black color option. And you can upgrade the RAM to 12 gigabytes and double the storage for $499. These are expensive handhelds. It looks like the majority of people are choosing the next tier option, which is what they call the AYANEO Pocket S2 Pro. This one has the larger battery as well as 16 gigabytes of RAM and 512 gigs of storage, and the retail or at least early bird price here is $559. And all of these choices will come in either a white or black color option, and if you want to have the gray DMG or what they call the retro power color option, that one is going to be a little bit more expensive, so $599 for this one. And then finally, the highest tier Pro model is going to have 16 gigs of RAM and a terabyte of storage, and that one is going to cost $670 or $700 if you want to get that retro power color. So make no mistake about it, these are early bird prices and this is an expensive handheld. Now, if you're new to AYANEO, they kind of have a pendulum style of pricing in that with the early bird campaign, yes, you can get it for relatively cheaper, but then once it goes on their website, it's going to swing over and become a lot more expensive. And then at some point, they basically just kind of go on like a clearance sale and they'll swing right back to something that's a lot cheaper. So you've basically got two opportunities to get the AYANEO devices for a little bit cheaper, either right in the very beginning, which has its own risks because there may be some sort of, quality control issues with those early products, or right at the tail end of its cycle. And that one is also a challenge because sometimes it's not the best device at that point because it's a little bit older. We'll talk about this more near the end of the video, but I think that the higher price point does make this thing a more niche product. And you really have to know what you're getting into when it comes to high-end Android gaming anyway. So let's go ahead and take a look inside and see what you will get at that price point. Now, the model they sent over to me is the 16GB RAM, 1TB storage model, and it's the retro power color. So it is the most expensive model that they have. This one costs $700 early bird pricing right now. Inside the box, you will obviously get the device itself, and then underneath, we've got a couple goodies to talk about. To start, we've got a user manual, super handy, and then also we have a USB-C charging cable. But the thing I want to talk about is in this little box right here. And that's because this is the first Android-based handheld I've ever seen with swappable D-pad options. By default, we have a traditional cross-style D-pad, and this one feels pretty good. It has a dome switch connection underneath, or what they are calling covered micro switches, which I think are just dome switches. But with the Pro versions of this device, it'll come with this shield-style D-pad, and it's an easy swap with this little tool. So it's kind of like changing out the keys in a keyboard where you just kind of, get some leverage and pop it out, and then you will put the other one inside. There's a little plastic piece right there that lets you know exactly where to place it. And so in terms of feel, it's still the same dome style switches, but with a shield style instead. And I think overall it works pretty well, depending on the type of game you're playing. It is going to have a more rounded feel to it, but underneath are those dome switches, so you will feel every single click as you move it around. It took me a little bit of time to acclimate to it, but after I got the hang of it, I found it to be pretty enjoyable. One thing worth noting is that the D-pad does stick out quite a bit from the shell when using the Shield one, just because it is so large. Personally, I've just been sticking with the regular cross-style D-pad just because it's a bit more traditional, and I think it feels great. But before we jump too far into controls, let's just do some quick impressions with the device itself. And first thing for me is that it feels super sleek and premium and rounded in all the right places. The front of the device is just one big piece of glass, which makes it look really sleek. And then the back here is also just got a really nice kind of somewhat sleek but matte texture to it. Along the edges, we've got a metal frame, which again lends to that premium quality. Now, the original AYANEO Pocket S had a similar setup with an all-glass front and then, that same kind of feeling on the back. And it did have this metallic look around the sides, but this is not metal. It's just another form of plastic. Also, one of the things I didn't like about the original is that I felt like it was a little bit too squarish along the sides, which felt like it was kind of digging into my hands as I was using it. And so I didn't find this to be a super comfortable handheld. And the moment I picked up the upgraded model, I was like, oh man, they've totally fixed it. Number one, it really is metal along the sides, which makes it feel a lot more premium, but then also it is a lot more rounded here along the edges to the point where it feels really nice and comfortable. I would almost compare it to a premium Nintendo Switch Lite at this point because it has that same amount of roundedness to it and it really fits in the hands nicely. And so over the past couple days of testing, I've had no complaints when it comes to the sharpness of these edges. I think they are well rounded. My second big impression was that we now have textured shoulder and trigger buttons, and they are really textured. I love this. And the triggers themselves are much bigger now. You can see they are nice and chunky, which is very comfortable. And then finally, my third initial takeaway was that these analog sticks have been changed and improved. They are now a full motion control, and they are TMR sticks as well, which means they are magnetic but low powered. And so, yeah, even though they are relatively small sticks, they feel pretty good to me. And so right off the bat, I think that these are big changes for me when it comes to just picking up this device and enjoying it. The first one I thought was just a little bit too sharp around the edges, and I didn't like the analog sticks on it, and this is a big improvement for me. Now, before we jump into controls and stuff, let's do a couple size comparisons so you get an idea of how big this device is. So first, we have the original AYANEO Pocket S. The overall design is very similar between the two, but you can see that the original was quite a bit smaller. It had a smaller screen and just a smaller device overall. Speaking Speaking of smaller, here is the AYANEO Odin 2 Mini with its 5-inch screen. There's a big difference here too. The Retroid Pocket 5 with its 5.5-inch screen is a little bit bigger than the Odin 2 Mini, but still quite a bit smaller than the Pocket S2. The Anbernic RG556 and 557 are about the same size as the Pocket S2, but with a smaller screen. This one really prioritizes ergonomics, so it's got these big chunky grips on it. Here's the original AYANEO Odin 2. This one has a 6-inch screen, so a little bit smaller, but the device size is about the same. And there are definitely Android devices that are larger than the AYANEO Pocket S2, including this one here, the AYANEO Odin 2 Portal. This one has a 7-inch screen. It's also OLED and 120 Hz. And the AYANEO Pocket Evo has a very similar screen to the Odin 2 Portal, again 7 inches, and this is the largest Android device that AYANEO makes. And so when it comes down to it, yeah, this is a larger handheld, but the fact that it's relatively sleek and kind of flat here on the back does make it feel not quite as big as it actually is. It's certainly not Steam Deck size, but it is a larger handheld compared to most others on the market. Now, I have the AYANEO Pocket S2 Pro model with the larger battery, which means it is heavier. It's 440 grams. That makes it nearly 100 grams heavier than the original Pocket S, and nearly 200 grams heavier than smaller handhelds like the Retroid Pocket 5. In the end, it's about the same weight as the AYANEO Odin 2 Portal, which is kind of surprising since this one is quite a bit bigger. I think a lot of it has to do with the metal siding around the edges, but it makes it feel a lot more premium as well, so it is a bit of a trade-off. In the end, I would classify this handheld as being hefty, but not heavy. By that, I mean that you definitely feel the weight as you're using it, but I haven't had any problems playing it whatsoever. And so I think it just feels like a very significant and premium handheld. So now let's go around the device and talk about all the different buttons and ports and everything else. We already talked about a couple of these, but let's talk about the analog sticks again. So these are TMR sticks and they have a full range of motion here. The caps can be pulled right off and it is the same size and connection as on other devices like the Odin 2 as well as the Retroid Pocket 5. So here is my replacement Odin 2 Portal caps, and these actually fit right on. So if you want to have something a little bit larger in size, it's a very easy fix. There are also 3D printed offerings on Etsy and other places as well, so you've got a lot of options when it comes to improving the joystick size if you would like. For my part, I would say the default sticks and caps are a little bit on the small side. I think I will probably end up upgrading these to something a bit larger, but I love the fact that they are now TMR and also have that nice wide range of motion. The original AYANEO Pocket S sticks were kind of like Nintendo Switch Joy-Con sticks, and I felt like these just kind of flopped over instead of giving you a full range of motion, and so I felt like these were a very non-premium feeling on a premium handheld. And so I think that AYANEO probably picked the best sticks they could have in the fact that they have a nice range of motion, they're easy to replace, and they also are less likely to develop stick drift. Now going back to the D-pad, I mentioned this is a dome switch D-pad and it feels very accurate. I love the fact that it can click in every single way that I want it to. It doesn't have the same kind of traditional pivot as you would expect in a rubber membrane D-pad, but I love the fact that I can still feel a click everywhere I go, so it feels very accurate. And this dome switch setup is going to work great in a variety of different games. For example, with Contra, because they are dome switches, you're not going to have accidental diagonals, because anytime you actually hit a diagonal, it's going to give you a soft click to let you know when you've pressed it. So like with other dome switch D-pad devices like the Retroid and the Odin devices, these are going to have the exact same experience. It's a PS Vita style D-pad. It's also going to give you a lot of feedback when you're playing a Street Fighter game, so it's very easy to do your Hadoukens and Shoryukens as long as you give it enough force. And when playing a precision platformer like Celeste, I can feel all of those different movements as well. And so yeah, there's not a single game that I wouldn't want to play with this D-pad. I think it's very good. And when you combine that with the fact that you can change it out to a shield-style D-pad as well, I kind of think that this is the best D-pad that AYANEO has ever made. Also on the left side, we've got our select and start buttons on the bottom. I've never been a fan of this placement just because it kind of requires a claw grip to actually press them, and it's hard to press them both at once. And so I would prefer to have them up here up top, like with the Nintendo Switch. And this button up here functions as a menu or home button. So if you're playing, like, say, for example, Xbox streaming, this is the same as pressing an Xbox button. The other function buttons on the right side include an AYANEO button. This will bring up your quick menu, and then this is an Android home button. We've got a second analog stick exactly the same as the first one, and then we have these new face buttons. Now, unlike the D-pad, these are rubber membrane buttons, and they feel very good. They don't take a lot of force to press down on them, and yeah, I think that they feel nice and classic. One thing I do like is that there is no glass in this inner circle right here. So as you're pressing on it, you're not actually pressing on the glass, which I think just feels a little bit more natural. So I've got no complaints about these face buttons. I think they are very good. On the top, we've got our heat exhaust. You can see the cooling fan on the back. And then also we have a microphone and an LED charging indicator, our volume up and down, and then a power as well as sleep button. And this is a fingerprint sensor too if you want to unlock your device that way. Now on each of the ends, we have our shoulder and trigger buttons. These shoulder buttons are actually really nice feeling. They call these a covered micro switch, and they also feel like very soft but easy to press down on. So I really like this feeling here, and that they're not super loud. And the triggers here are also very good. They have that nice texture quality to them too. Not a ton of throw to them, but they just feel very good because they are nice and wide. Here's a look at the original AYANEO ones, and these ones were always a bit weird. You can see they kind of flare out at an angle, and they also just weren't very large. These ones just go straight down and feel a lot more comfortable. And then finally, we've got what they call the LC and RC buttons. So these are programmable, and initially in a lot of the other Android builds, you couldn't program for anything, but now they can be programmed in their software. And I like the default mappings that they have for these buttons. So this one up here on the top right is going to be your back button, so you can jump into, your menu settings for whatever app you're using, and then this one will be your recently used app, so you can quickly go through here. And so I actually just left these where they are because I think they're a good fit. On the left side, we don't have anything, but on the right side, we have a single button. This is your performance mode toggle. By default, AYANEO has a bunch of different performance modes. There's eco mode, there's balance mode, and streaming mode. And then also we've got a gaming mode and then max mode. So this button will toggle between them. It'll basically cycle through them. So you can see here, we have the max mode. If I press it again, it's going to go back down to the first mode, which is the saving mode. On the bottom, we've got our two stereo speakers, a microphone hole, and then also our USB-C charging port, which can also display video out, and then our 3.5mm headphone jack, always nice to see, and then our micro SD card slot. Then finally on the back, we've got our cooling vent, and this thing is actually really robust. They've redone the entire cooling profile of this machine from the previous model. And of note, the fan noise in max mode is quite loud, like it is with other devices, but it does a good job of cooling. So we're in the fan mode right now, and I'll give you a listen, and then I'm going to turn it off so you can hear what it's like without it. Now it's going to take me some time to assess the overall fan noise and performance modes and whatnot and what you can expect, but I will say that for the most part, only certain games are going to need you to play in max mode, and that's the only time that you can really hear or feel the fan. And so I think that unless you're playing really high-end stuff, this is a relatively silent and cool running machine. In my initial testing, the results have been very good. We've had a 92% stability here when playing a 20-minute wildlife extreme test in the max mode, and then also the temperature has been relatively low, 41 degrees Celsius when pushing it to the max. I have seen the number get higher, about 55 degrees Celsius when really pushing it, like for example with Nintendo Switch gaming, but still that is a pretty cool profile. Okay, let's talk a little bit about ergonomics. I found this to be a pretty comfortable device altogether, but it is relatively flat, so you have to know what you're getting into. Again, like I said before, it kind of feels like a very premium Nintendo Switch Lite. Because the device is relatively large, there is plenty of space for all my fingers, so I don't feel cramped or anything, and all of the buttons are easy to access. It does feel a little bit more natural to use the left analog stick than the D-pad, but it's not hard to shift your hand down and play a D-pad-centric game like this as well, so I have found it to be very comfortable. The only time that I felt like the ergonomics were kind of a problem was when playing a dual stick analog game, like a more modern game like Doom: The Dark Ages. And this is the same experience with basically any other flat-backed handheld, so I'm not surprised by it, but it is one of those things where I kind of wish I had a 3D printed grip. Now, this was the same experience with the original Pocket S, but AYANEO actually eventually released a protective case that had grips to them. I never picked one up myself, but I heard that this improved the ergonomics significantly, so hopefully they will offer something else like this in the future for the Pocket S2 or we will see community solutions available on Etsy. And so when it comes down to it, it's a very similar experience to using the Nintendo Switch Lite, but of course with a more premium and hefty feel to it. So if you don't have any problems with those ergonomics, you probably won't have any here. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the screen. I'm going to do some more in-depth testing with the actual review, but I wanted to give you some quick impressions. And I think this screen is actually pretty good. It's not OLED, and it also doesn't go beyond 60 Hertz, but I think the overall color profile is pretty good, and it does get nice and bright and dim. Here we are at max brightness, and you can see that it is blowing out my camera a little bit, which is a good sign. That means that you could probably play this thing outdoors. For the most part, I have been playing this at about 30 or 40% brightness, which is always a good sign. When it comes to playing this outdoors, I think it'll be a better fit. Now here we are at 0% brightness, and you can see it's still visible here on the screen, which means that it does get pretty dim, but not to the point where I would want to play this in a pitch black environment, because at that point it'll get a lot brighter when you're trying to play it. So I would say that probably in terms of playing this device in the dark, this may not be the best device out of the box. Now sometimes in Android there's the option to actually go extra dim, but I don't see this within the Android settings or within like the quick menu either. And so unfortunately, this might be as dim as it can get. So long story short, this is a screen that does prioritize brightness over dimness, and I think that's probably the best choice to make, considering the fact that, a lot of people want to play this like outdoors or in a brightly lit environment, which means that a high brightness is going to come in favor better than, just playing it in bed. And so I think this is probably still the right decision to make, but I do wish it got just a little bit dimmer at its lowest setting. Now, overall, the audio profile is a lot better than I was expecting, considering that a lot of their other devices are not very good. Even though it is downward firing speakers, I found them to be very clear, especially as you're holding the device, because the sound is just going to kind of cup into your hands, and then it's going to bounce off of them and go into your ears. And I think it sounds good. Now, I'm going to save a lot of the software discussion for the final review, but yes, we can bring up this quick menu here and make adjustments like the fan mode and the performance mode. You can also adjust things like your vibration speed and whatnot too. In general, we've got a lot of basic functions going on, including, the ability to use RGB lights around your sticks. So there's quite a few things to do here, but I want to spend more time diving a little bit more deeper into it in my final review. Another thing I'll say for the final review are going to be full-on performance metrics, but I can't show off a couple things right now. So let's talk about benchmarks first. Down below, we have the AYANEO Pocket Evo with the G3X Gen 2 chipset, which is still a very powerful handheld, and you can see that its best loop score is about 4100 on Wildlife Extreme with 3D Mark. Now with the new chipset on the AYANEO Pocket S2, which is the Snapdragon G3 Gen 3, this one is a lot more performant. You can see its best loop score is 4800, and its lowest loop score is 4500. So even in the worst score in this 20-minute test, it still does quite a bit better, almost 10% better than the Pocket Evo. And one of the exciting things about having a very performant chip like this is that you can play many systems without having to max out that chipset because we've got a lot of headroom. For example, almost every Gen 6 game that I played, I was able to upscale to the 1440p resolution of the screen without having to change it beyond the balanced mode in the presets. So in other words, the fan isn't even kicking on this because I'm not even pushing the device very far, but you can see here in Dolphin, I can play these games at a 4x resolution, which is beyond 1440p. And these games do look extra crisp on this display. I figured it would be about the same as 1080p, but no, I can see a big difference here in terms of sharpness. And every single game I played on GameCube and Wii did just fine in that balance mode. I didn't even have to push it into the gaming mode. It's a very similar story with PlayStation 2, except that this one actually allows me to go in smaller increments of upscaling. So here I can do a 3.5x resolution, which is still just a little bit more than 1440p, but I don't have to push it all the way to 4x. And the experience here is very similar. I'm just playing these in the balance mode without really pushing the chipset very far, but it is still playing all these games at full speed with very few hiccups. Now, of course, emulation is always a moving target, especially on Android, and so I would expect that there are going to be some compatibility issues with this chipset and the emulator when trying to play these games, so not every game is going to play perfectly. The only game where I really found an issue was Champions of Norrath. For the most part, I could play this one at a 3.5x resolution, but I did have to turn on gaming mode, which did turn on the fan a little bit, but still was very tolerable. However, a few minutes into playing this game, the performance just absolutely tanked. It basically capped itself at 30 frames per second, and I'm not sure what's going on here. And the fact that once it hit 30 frames per second, it never really recovered or went beyond that leads me to think that it's not a performance issue, but really a configuration issue. My guess here is maybe something is happening within the firmware which is causing it to drop down to 30 frames per second. Unfortunately, there's nothing within the settings to change the frame rate or the screen refresh rate. And so unfortunately, once this happened, I didn't really know what to do other than to restart the game. And when I did that, it went back to 60 frames per second. So definitely an odd experience, and I'm not sure what's going on here, but I will report it to the AYANEO team in case they can work on it. Another preliminary software issue that I ran into with this device is that it is not able to use the UI settings downloader within Emulation Station Desktop Edition. This generally is a permissions issue. We've seen this with other devices like the Anbernic RG557, so I'm not really sure what's going on here, but unfortunately this means that I cannot download and install new themes without doing it manually. I did reach out to the developer of this app and he said the same thing, that it's probably a permissions or software issue, and so again I will report this to AYANEO and hopefully they can find a fix. It is worth noting that this is not an issue that has happened in other AYANEO devices, so there is something going on here which is new. Now I haven't tested every single game or system with this device just yet, after all I've only had it a couple days, but I did want to show a couple other results. When it came to Wii U, I had a mixture of performance settings, so here with Wind Waker HD, I actually was able to play this in balance mode, much like with PS2 and GameCube, and the game played at full speed in the native 1080p resolution. For Breath of the Wild, I played this again at a native 720p, but I put on a 40 frames per second cap, and after going through and, changing all the graphics packs and whatnot, I was able to get about 25-26 frames per second on average, which I think is very playable with this game. But in order to reach these performance metrics, I did have to switch it over into the max mode, which means that the fan was running at that highest speed, and it was quite loud. But thankfully, the device itself stayed relatively cool, so no heating or whatsoever with the device itself. When it came to the Nintendo Switch, the number one thing I did is I used just the latest turn-up drivers, and then also I put everything in docked mode. And for lightweight and even medium weight games, things like Hades and Ori and the Blind Forest, I was able to play these in the balanced performance mode preset. Again, about the same power as the PlayStation 2, and these games were running just fine. For more intensive 3D games, like Super Mario 3D World and Bowser's Fury, this one I had to set into gaming mode, and it was getting a pretty stable 60 frames per second. It would drop down here and there, and I would hear a couple audio stutters, but still very playable. When it came to higher-end Nintendo Switch games like Super Mario Odyssey, this one I did put in that full-on max mode, and this is again going to make the fan go a lot, but it was a relatively stable experience. I still had a couple dips here and there, and some audio stutters as well, but there's a lot of factors involved with this game. There are a bunch of different emulator apps that I'm going to have to test with, and then also other turnip drivers too, to really dial in these settings. But at least in my first try with the latest turnip drivers and using the Citron emulator, this is still running very well. Now, because we have that streaming mode, I wanted to test this out as well. So here I am using Artemis, which is a fork of Moonlight, and I'm essentially running this at 1440p, streaming it from a local PC here in the studio. And I was surprised to find that the average decoding time was 2.8 milliseconds, which is super low. It might be the lowest I've ever seen with this app. And so yes, this is going to be excellent when it comes to streaming from a latency perspective. And seeing this play at 1440p also looks gorgeous on the screen. I also did a little bit of cloud stream testing here with NVIDIA GeForce Now, again at 1440p high settings, but you have to bear in mind that I am in Hawaii, which means I have relatively high ping. And so other than the ping and the inherent latency that comes from playing in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, this was also a very good experience and super sharp and crisp at 1440p. Now, I've got a lot more testing to do. I want to try out things like Windlater as well as PlayStation 3, and then also I've got a bunch of Android game testing to do as well. So don't take this all as gospel fact, but so far everything that I've seen has been very promising and impressive. So putting this all together, I think my main takeaways of this early impressions video is that the AYANEO Pocket S2 is better than the original in just about every single way. I had a lot of issues with the original Pocket S, and it feels like they addressed every single one of those line by line. And this is also a very premium feeling handheld. If you're looking for one of the most streamlined experiences on Android, this is definitely up there for me. The only thing that really holds me back is this somewhat niche pricing. The fact that it starts at $440 early bird pricing and goes all the way up to $700. I think when it comes down to it, high-end Android gaming is a kind of a niche concept on its own. When you have to start talking about things like WinLater and turnip drivers and hunting down APKs and better versions for different chipsets, that is a very niche topic. And I think that those who are interested in a device like this are also interested in that niche topic, which means that this kind of feels like a niche product. So even though it is a very expensive handheld, I feel like the people who are actually going to be shopping for this device know what they're going to be getting into. And I think for everybody who is kind of looking at this device, they will probably be very happy with the results here, because I am. This is a device that's not going to revolutionize the handheld gaming industry because it's priced out of that middle tier. You know, something like the Retroid Pocket 5 would be a better fit in that regard. But I think that people who know what they're getting into and are willing to cough up the money for it are going to be very happy with this product. Anyway, those are my quick impressions of the AYANEO Pocket S. It kind of feels like a full review, but I have more things to test. In fact, I'm going on a trip here later today. I've got to go to the airport in like 3 hours, and I'm going to take this handheld with me. It's going to be my primary handheld, so I'm going to do a bunch of testing while on that trip, and I think that'll give me a better idea of what this device is worth and who it's a good fit for. So be on the lookout for that second review. It'll probably be a week or two before I finally wrap it up. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments down below, and if there's anything you want me to specifically test in my final review. As always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.